Boker Tov, Givrin.
Boker Tov.
Now, do I ask after an exam, Ma Shlomchem? Lo ra for most of you, okay, and that's not a hoorah, right? Hoorah in Hebrew means it is evil. All right. Well, I'm glad to see that you're still smiling and able to have a little bit of humor after taking an exam like that. The first thing I want us to do before we go back to verb conjugations and go over chapter 13 with you is to go over vocabulary. We want to go over vocabulary at the end of chapter 12 and vocabulary at the end of chapter 13. Remember that we will have a vocabulary quiz on Thursday this time. So the next time we meet, we're going to have a vocabulary quiz. Yes, question, Eric?
This Thursday, is it chapter 12 only?
It is chapter 12 and 13. 12 and 13. We're going to go over both chapters. So I start at chapter 12, page 88, and read through these. If you'll repeat the pronunciation after me, lo. Lo means not. It's the negative. It's a negative that you need to remember is an absolute negative. This is the negative used in the Ten Commandments. It's the idea in many cases of never. It's what we call an objective permanent negative. There are several different negatives in Hebrew, and this one is a very important one, one that you want to remember. So keep that in mind. It's a very emphatic negative, no. Sometimes translated never. Sarah.
Sarah.
That is a proper name for Sarah. Yosef.
Yosef.
Another proper name, Joseph. Eitzah.
Eitzah.
This is a feminine noun meaning council, not C-O-U-N-C-I-L, a group meeting, but C-O-U-N-S-E-L, meaning that advice that is given. Counsel, C-O-U-N-S-E-L. Please keep those straight. It's very different. The two are very different in English, even though they sound the same, and they're very different in Hebrew. Mitzrayim.
Mitzrayim.
That is the name for Egypt. Nachash.
Nachash.
Good, I heard some gutturalization there. All right, means snake or serpent. Zakein.
Zakein.
As a verb, this means he was old. As a noun, it means elder or old man. Elder or old man. On Thursday, I'm going to teach you a song. It's a song of a young Israeli girl who has her marriage being arranged by her family. And her song is Ach lo zachen, Ach lo zachen. Ach, in this case, is an interjection meaning oh. And lo means what? We just had it right here. Lo means not or no. Zaken, not an old man. All right? It's a cute song and it has a lot of vocabulary in it that you'll remember as we go along. So we'll learn that on Thursday. Zakein is he was old as a verb, and as a noun it means elder or old man. Bilti means not, except, or without. It's a special negative that's used only in certain situations. Balal.
Balal.
He mixed or he confused. And in the context, Balal is used of confusing languages, as in Genesis 10 and 11 at the Tower of Babel. Al.
Al.
This is the other major negative in Hebrew. This is a temporary subjective negative. Temporary subjective negative. If this is used, for example, it is used when Joshua writes in Joshua chapter 1 verse 8, do not fear, do not be afraid. It doesn't mean you are never to be afraid. It means that in this situation you are not to be afraid. And so the Hebrew makes a clear distinction there. So this is the temporary subjective negative, where lo is the permanent objective negative. Something to remember when you're checking the Hebrew and looking at it, because it will help you to better understand the text. Yakol.
Yakol.
He was able. Chaya.
Chaya.
He lived or he was alive. Yasaf.
Yasaf.
He added or he did again. Yarad.
Yared.
He descended or he went down. Baruch.
Baruch.
Baruch is actually a participle. It is sometimes used as an adjective, and it means blessed. Blessed. Yaakov
Yaakov.
means Jacob. Rivka
Rivka.
is Rebecca. Po
Po.
means here. H-E-R-E, not H-E-A-R. Haknaini,
Hanani.
the Canaanites. Lavan
Lavan.
is the name Laban. Nahor
Nahor.
is the name Nahor. Notice we have a number of vocabulary that involves proper names. That's because you need to know these proper names to do the exercise. And so keep these in mind for that. Then let's turn to chapter 13, vocabulary, on page 94. And let's go over this, starting at the upper right-hand corner. Hine
Hine.
means behold. Esov
Esov.
is hyssop. Hyssop. And it's a plant, a desert plant that grows in the cracks and crevices of rocks and was used in purification ceremonies in the Old Testament. Then we have egudah.
Egudah.
That is a bundle or a sprinkling bush. That's part of that purification ceremony. Lamor.
Lamor.
Lamor means saying, but it's also equivalent to a colon. Okay, that doesn't mean it means colon. It's equivalent to a colon. If we're writing in English and we said, he said, we usually use a comma and then have double quotes, I am he. All right? Now, in place of that comma, we might use a colon to indicate what is said. In Hebrew, you would have he said, and then you would have saying, and lamor, saying, would be after you have he said. And so he said, saying, or he spoke, saying, and that saying then is not going to be translated, it's going to be equivalent of a colon. It's like the haughty recitative in Greek that merely introduces what is said and is not translated. It's like a colon. And so lamor is that fashion. It's actually an infinitive form with a lamed preposition. But you need to remember this because it occurs so frequently in Scripture. It occurs literally thousands of times. All right? Then we go next. Lamazeh means why in the world. It's not just why. Lama is why. Lamazeh is why in the world. It's an emphatic way of saying something. So don't take world literally here as referring to the earth and all it contains. It's used idiomatically in English. We say, why in the world would you do that? Okay? In the world has absolutely no meaning. It's emphatic. It's emphatic. You need in the world, yes, and you need to put it in parentheses or italics to indicate it. Eric, question? No. Okay. And then taval.
Taval.
He dipped. Hachiti.
Hachiti.
That's the Hittites. Ha-emori.
Ha-emori.
The Amorites. Saph.
Saph.
Means bowl. Ha-hivi.
Ha-hivi.
The Hivites. Ha-perezi.
Ha-perezi.
The Perizzites. Again, you need to know these proper nouns for your translation in the exercises. What do you note about these words like ha-hiti, ha-emori, ha-hevi, and ha-perezi, and earlier we had ha-ka'ani? What do you note about them? They all end in a hirik yod. They all end in a hirik yod. That is the ethnic ending, like the ites. Okay? If you are in Ivri, you are a Hebrew. The E ending tells you that. All right? It's also used for the language. You're learning Ivri. Actually, in the language, it's Ivrit, Ivrit with a tau on the end. But Ivri is the people, the Hebrews. And then you noted, someone already mentioned, the definite article on these. The Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Amorites, etc. So watch for those. You'll see them as you're doing the exercises. All right, before we go to the exercise, to give you some clues on it, so that you're prepared to do it. It's not due until Tuesday, a week from today. But in case you want to get started on it early, I want to be certain that we cover it. So let's go back where we were and talk about the verb conjugations. And this is on chapter 13. And if you want anything open, I would say you want page 90 or page 92 open so that you can see some of the things that we're talking about. When we talk about the verb conjugations, we went over this briefly last week, but it was definitely a preview. And we're going to go over this today, and we're going to go over it again on Thursday. This is a very significant part of your Hebrew learning. You have simple conjugations, or stems, as they're sometimes called. The first one is called kal. The second one is nifal. Then we have causative conjugations called hifil and hofal. And then we have intensive, and I put it in quotes because every Hebrew student is taught that these are intensive. But in reality, they're very seldom intensives. They're very seldom intensives. For the piel and the pual, they are more likely to be factative. Now, factative is a kind of causative. Causative is he made him do that. That's causative. Causative is direct causation, causing someone to do something, or he caused the chair to fall over. All right? So you have a direct causation, you have an action resulting, and that causation is exerted upon a person or individual to produce the subsequent act. All right? It's causing an act. But the factative means to cause the occurrence of a state. In other words, for example, he sanctified him. That is literally, he made him to enter the state of sanctification. In other words, he brought him to the state of sanctification. He brought him into the state of being holy. So a factative results in a condition. The factative results in a condition, a state of being, such as holiness. All right? Whereas the causative results in an act that is done. Those are the distinctions between causative and factative. Causative causes an act to occur. Causes someone to do something, causes something to do something. Factative brings something or someone into a state of being. All right? That's the distinction. And the piel and pual are really primarily factatives. They're rarely intensive. So don't get into the habit of using some intensive adverb to translate the piel. We'll talk about that more when we get to the piel. The reason I'm starting now is to make certain that you get this from the very start and have a corrective. Because one of my pet peeves is having students just automatically translate the piel and pual with an intensive meaning. And part of that is because of the way they're taught. If you're taught that, of course you're going to do it. So I'm trying to avoid that, and at the same time let you know that in most grammars, they just go ahead and still refer to it as intensive, even though later on they try to disabuse you of that knowledge, but you've already had it ingrained in you from the start. So I'm trying to not ingrain that at the start. The hitpael is also sometimes classified as the intensive. It's more of a reflexive. We'll talk about those in a minute. Simple is like the verbs that we've been memorizing. He wrote, for example, katav. He heard, shamah. He saw, ra'ah. He did, asa. These are all cals that you've been learning for vocabulary. The only different one you've learned is diber, for he spoke, is a piel. But it always has this a, or in some cases where you have a weak letter at the end of a word, like in asa. Remember, that is a weak, it is a weak letter in that it is a guttural. And a comet's hey is just like a vowel. And we transliterate this way. We don't even put an H on it because the hey is silent. And so in that situation, the pathek that is normally in that last syllable in cal verbs is instead changed to a comets because it's an open accented syllable. It doesn't conclude in a consonant. So it's open accented, that pathek has to be heightened. But these are all cal verbs. And notice those A-class vowels being used there. Now, that's not the only pattern of vowels that will be found for cal. But this will take care of over 80% of all the verbs you find in the Hebrew Bible that occur in cal are occurring with this pattern. A comet's if you have a weak letter, or a comet's pathek if they're both strong, like here. We have pa'al, he made, he did, which is a synonym of asa. Shamer, he kept, or he guarded. Pakad, he visited, or he judged. The nifal is the passive of the simple. So nifal means it was done, or he was made. Nishmer, it was kept, or he was kept, he was guarded. Nifkad, he was visited. All right? Passive. Nifal is passive. Notice the forms. If you know the name, you've got the game. All right? Learn the 7 names. If you learn the 7 names, you'll have no problem. The only one that doesn't fit its name is the cal. And why in the world they named it cal instead of pa'al, I don't know. But the cal is the lightest form. It is the one without infixes, without prefixes, and therefore they called it cal because cal means light. L-I-G-H-T, light in weight. It means that which is fast and quick. And so that's why it's named. But notice, if you know the name, Nifal, just listen to the pronunciation. Nifal, Nishmer, Nifkad. They all follow the same pattern. They all have an N-I prefix, ni. And they all have an a at the end. Nifal, Nishmer, Nifkad. If you know the name, you can recognize the form. You don't need to memorize all those paradigms in the back of your textbook in order to learn these. Just learn the names. Which is easier, to memorize all those paradigms in the back, page after page after page, or just to learn the names, the 7 names? I guarantee it's easier to learn the 7 names.
Question, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is the hierarch always the pointing underneath the new?
Yes. Unless you have something else going on, like a guttural, that might change things. There are some rare exceptions, but that's the primary thing. Yes, that's what you're going to look for. All right? Yes, sir.
Did you say why we do the translation in like past tense, he was something rather than he is?
That is just a mere means of trying to get you to understand the verb and to also make a distinction later when we get into another form of the verb. But keep in mind that time is determined by context and context alone. All right? All right, the hifil is the causative. And notice how it's spelled there. It has a hey with a hierarch. That's the he part. And then it says feel. And notice it has a hierarch yod infix between the 2nd and 3rd letters of the root. The root is pa'al. The hifil is hifil. Just sounds exactly the same. Hifil, hifil. Hishmir, hishmir, and hifkid. They're all the same. If you know the name hifil, you can recognize these forms. They stand out. They jump off the page at you. All right? Hafal. Hafal is a kametz hatuf. It's an closed, unaccented syllable. Hofal. That's why it's spelled with an H-O. Hofal, Hoshmer, Hofkad. Take any three letters of any verb that you have, and you can form this very easily. And you can recognize it. Okay? It follows the same pattern. And then the Piel. Notice how it changed here. It's the very name. Pa'al becomes Piel. Notice the E-A. E-A. The difference is when you have a radical that does not refuse doubling, like that ayin refused, then you have a doubling dagish placed in it. So it's shimer. Shimer. So it has these characteristics that you have a doubling dagish in the second root letter, if at all possible. Pikade. Pikade. And then we have pu'al. And the same thing occurs. A doubled middle letter of the root. But notice this, the name is pu'al. You have pu'al, shumer, pukad. Notice it has the same exact pattern. If you have difficulty with these, it may be because you have difficulty still recognizing the vowels and the letters. And if you have difficulty recognizing vowels and letters, you need to spend some extra time pronouncing words, learning correct pronunciation, because correct pronunciation is everything. Correct pronunciation can help you resolve difficulties in what you see in the text so quickly, rather than having to try to memorize page after page after page of paradigms. Just correct, simple pronunciation and correct memorization of these names. The Hithpa'el, notice it looks just like it sounds. Hithpa'el, it has a hith prefix, and it has the a'el, and notice it's one of these that are intensive or factative, and so the second root letter has a dagish in it. Now, some of you are saying, but wait a minute. The example you have here on hishtamer doesn't have hith, it has hish. But this is for shamer. Shamer. And what's happened here is in the Hebrew, they do not like having a tau before a sheen. To them, that does not sound right. So they reverse the two letters. And so it becomes hishtamer. And they'll do that with anything that is a sibilant. A sibilant is an S sound. Okay? It includes Z, it includes Sade, Sin, Shin, Samik, and Zayin. All of those are sibilants. They have that sound, sibilant. When someone says the sibilant serpent spoke to the woman, that is an intentional use of sibilant sounds to convey that, and it's really saying he hissed. He hissed. Sibilant is the hissing sound. All right, so that is hishtamer. Hithpakade. Hithpakade. Hithpael, hishtamer, hithpakade. Even with hishtamer, you still have the combination of sounds that will help you to know that it's a hithpael, even though there's been a very slight change there. You know that the hi on the end, or on the beginning, hi, is not hifil because you don't have the e on the inside. Hifil is not there. Okay? And that's the only other one that has the he at the beginning, the hith. All right? So if you learn these things, if you know the names, you've got them. Let's pronounce these names together. Cal. Nifal. Hifil. Hofal. Piel. Pual. Hithpael. Now let's pronounce the word starting up the upper right. Pakad. Shamer. Pa'al. What's the name of the conjugation? Nifkad. Nishmer. Nifal. What's the name of the conjugation? Hifkid. Hishmir. Hifil. What's the name of the conjugation? Hofkad. Hoshmer.
Hashmer.
Hafal.
Hafal.
What's the name of the conjugation?
Hafal.
Piked.
Piked.
Shimer.
Shemer.
Piel.
Piel.
What's the name of the conjugation?
Piel.
Pukad.
Pukad.
Shumer.
Shumer.
Pual.
Pual.
What's the name of the conjugation?
Pual.
Hithpaked.
Hithpaked.
Hishtamer.
Hishtamer.
Hithpael.
Hithpael.
What's the name of the conjugation?
Hithpael.
All right, see, it all fits, it all matches together. Yes, sir, John.
The vowel markings, they carry the same pattern with each of those words. Will any word in that area have those same vowel markings in that pattern?
Okay, good question. If we add any suffixes to this to make the different persons, some of the vowels change, but not enough to change the pattern completely. The pattern will always be recognizable. The pattern will always be recognizable. If you, for example, do something in one of these, like the, let's take, for example, the, how can I, in the piel, if we add an oo ending, and we end up with something like shimmeru, notice it still has it'll still have the details. It'll still have a doubled middle letter, and it'll still have one of the two vowel sounds. It will not change those. Will not change all of them. Okay? So there's a number of things here. As we go through and inflect these, you'll still see that there's enough pattern left that there's no mistaking what they are. Okay? All right? Now let's summarize these verb conjugations again for you. When we talk about the base pattern, it's the cal is the base pattern. The nifal is a passive of the cal. The hifil is a causative. The hofal is a causative. The piel is the quote-unquote intensive / factative. The pual is the quote-unquote intensive / factative. And the hithpael is this quote-unquote intensive / factative. And the nifal is passive. The cal is active. The hifil is active. The hofal is passive. The piel is active. The pual is passive. And the hithpael is reflexive. Reflexive. Passive is something is done to you. Reflexive is you do it to yourself. All right, that's the difference. Reflexive, you do it to yourself. I hit myself is not a passive. That's reflexive. Passive is I was hit. All right? Active is I hit him. All right? So there's a difference there. Active, passive, and reflexive. And you'll have to keep those voices in mind. So as we look at these, the simples are cal and nifal. The causatives are hifil and hofal. The intensive factives are the piel, puel, and hithpael. So they're all grouped together in this fashion. All right? Now, let's talk about how to inflect just the cal. And we call this the cal perfect or katal. Katal is nothing more than another way of giving the name of the perfect. And when you have the perfect, like if you have the verb katav, he wrote, or you have the verb katal, he killed, and it's always been in the older grammars, we've always used katal as the primary verb for the paradigms. And that's why we talk about things being katal and yiktol and everything else, is that's the form that has been used in the primary paradigm, because pa'al, that was used by the Arab grammarians that put together the original grammars, pa'al has this weak radical in the middle. It has the ayin, a guttural, that affects things on the forms of the words because it rejects doubling. So the piel, puel, and hithpael, it changes the form because it rejects the doubling. And so you have all these problems created by having a guttural. So they said, let's get rid of a guttural. Let's get what we call a strong form of the verb. Weak verbs are verbs that have gutturals in them. Strong verbs are those that do not have gutturals. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. We'll talk about those later on, of other weak verbs that look like they might be strong. But basically, that's the basic distinction. All right? So they chose a strong verb. The strongest verb, the verb that occurs most often as far as having all 7 different conjugations involved, is katal. So they chose it. So this is called the perfect. This is a cal perfect third masculine singular. This is a cal perfect third masculine singular. So they chose this and said, okay, let's call this katal. And katal is saying the same thing as perfect. Now, when we call the verb in Hebrew a perfect, we're not talking about a perfect as in Greek. A perfect in Greek means an action that was completed in the past but has continuing results. That is not how the word perfect is being used here. And because of that confusion, then many are saying, let's forget calling it a perfect, let's call it the katal. In other words, just take a form of it like we created the 7 conjugation names. Nifal is from nifal, all right? So katal means perfect. It's that form of the verb called perfect. Another way of referring to this is it is the suffix conjugation. Because the perfect, when it is inflected by person and number, only changes the ending of the word. And so it's called a suffix conjugation. The second major verb in Hebrew is a prefix conjugation, because for person and gender and number, it adds a prefix as well as a suffix. So this is sometimes called suffix conjugation. Third masculine singular, we take the root, mem, shin, and lamed, and it becomes mashal or pakad, and that is he ruled or he visited. Mashal, he ruled. Pakad, he visited. That's cal, perfect, third masculine singular. So as we're looking at these, one of the things you have to remember is the order for parsing. Parse means to assign the parts, to identify the parts. So as we look at a verb like pakad, and we say, okay, what is the parsing for pakad? It is a cal. You give the name of the conjugation or stem first. You give, whether it is a perfect, next, a cal perfect. You give the person, you give the gender, you give the number. So that is always the order that you use. That's always the order of parsing. So this is a cal perfect third masculine singular. Or if you're taking it from someone else, we'll say it's a cal katal third masculine singular. Or someone else say it's a cal suffix conjugation third masculine singular. Okay? Everyone clear on that? Do you have any questions on that? Yes, Kelly.
Do you want us to say perfect is what you
Yes, use perfect because it is the one that is most universally utilized. It's the one most universally utilized. Okay? You'll have me over and over again using katal to indicate it because of a desire to make certain you don't get locked in to the perfect in the concept that you have it in Greek or in English. Okay? All right, let's go to the third feminine singular. Third feminine singular, take the same root letters and it becomes mashla. Now the reason for the X's on the screen there, those represent the form of the personal pronoun. Third masculine singular personal pronoun is who. It doesn't affect the verb form at all. The verb form has no suffix. He, third feminine singular, Hebrew, doesn't affect the feminine at all. The feminine here takes the same thing we see as a suffix on a feminine noun, a comets hey. So that's why the X is there. Notice that it becomes mashla. Okay, mashla. Mashallah and pakada. Pakada is she ruled, she visited. Notice that the pathic is reduced to a schwa when you add that. Notice that if you're going to maintain the one key vowel, the comets, it's got to have an accent by it. So you have a metheg there beside that comets in order to keep that syllable open so it can keep the long characteristic vowel of the cow. So this goes back to John's question. When we start adding suffixes, are there changes? Yes, but notice the change here maintained that long comets under the first letter. All right? And we know it's not nifal because it doesn't have ni on it. We know it's not hifil because it doesn't have a he on it. We know it's not hofal because it doesn't have a ha on it. We know it's not p-ale because it doesn't sound like p-ale. All right? Mashallah does not sound like p-ale. And there's no doubling dogish in that second root letter. Pu-al doesn't sound like that either. Hith-pa-ale. We know it's not hith-pa-ale. It doesn't have a hith on the front of it. All right? It's kind of like the, what do you call that? Lisping snake. Hith. All right? You notice it has nothing on it. Therefore, it is the cow. See how simple it is? It's cow. It doesn't fit any other name that you've learned for the 7 conjugations. You don't have to learn all the forms of those conjugations. You just have to learn this form because all of them take exactly the same suffixes. All of them take the same suffixes. John?
Okay, we know it's a cow because of the ah
Yes.
sound there. We know it's a feminine because of the ending and the singular.
Correct.
How do we know it's a perfect?
You know it's a perfect because it has only suffixes. Okay, that's why I call it a suffix conjugation. All right. Second masculine singular, you go now to the personal pronouns which will apply. You learned atta, atta. So it becomes mashalta, mashalta, and pakadta. You ruled, you visited. Notice the ending, the suffix. That suffix is not found on any other verb except a perfect. Okay? Second feminine singular. We take at. So it becomes mashalt. And it becomes pakad. You, feminine singular, ruled. You visited. First common singular, ani, I. Take the hirik yod off the end, it becomes mashalti, mashalti, pakadti. The accent's missing there for some reason. It should be there. I ruled, I visited. Third common plural does not fit. It's the third person where it doesn't fit the pronouns. The third person where it doesn't fit the pronouns. And here it's the shurik ending, the shurik ending. Mashlu, pakadu is they ruled, they visited. The second masculine plural, atem is the pronoun. So we're going to have mashaltem. You, masculine plural, ruled. Pakadtem, you, masculine plural, visited. Second feminine plural, you learned aten. Aten. Mashalten. You, feminine plural, ruled. Pakadten. You, feminine plural, visited. And the first common plural, you learned nachnu or anachnu. Notice the nu ending. So it becomes mashalnu. Pakadnu is we ruled, we visited. Question, John?
In the example in the book with Shamar, the shin and the second masculine plural and second feminine plural changes to a schwa. Does it just do that sometimes?
I will have to check that out and find out why we have the two different ones. I'll come back to you with that. I think the paradigm I have up here is wrong. And the reason is it should follow the rule of third syllable back. Should be shortened as short as possible. So I have to double check that. I don't know why that's this way on the chart. Okay? I'll come back to you with that. I think keep with the book for now instead of this up here, because I think that's just a mistake in showing the transition of forms that didn't take the transition far enough. Thank you. All right? So this would be mishaltem and mishalten and just those two. And it's because those are strong suffixes, strong suffixes. The only thing I can think of is if those are in pause, if something would change, but I'll have to check that and see. Okay. I'm going to take it that this is an error here on the screen. Okay, good question, good observation. I love it when students are paying attention to the details. That tells me you're learning. Tells me John has got the concept and he's making the comparison. All right? Any other questions that you have? See clearly the suffixes are coordinated with the pronouns, the personal pronouns, except the third person. Notice also we have masculine and feminine in the third and second in the singular. We have common for first. And then in the plural, we have masculine and feminine only for the second person. The third person and the first person are both common. Now remember, common does not mean neuter. Common means it can be either feminine or masculine. It can be used for both. Notice the plural ending on the third person. Third plural ends in shurik. And you can remember that. You can mark it down. Whenever you see anything ending in a shurik, 60+% of the time it's going to be a plural ending on a verb. The other 40 and a little bit under % of the time, it's going to be a third masculine singular pronominal suffix. Or, if you're looking at the noon here, the last one, pakadnu, it's a first common plural, but notice it's plural. The shurik is a good indicator of plural. So keep that in mind. Okay, any other questions on these? You have to memorize this paradigm. The Cal paradigm is the only one Dr. Buznitz and I asked the students to memorize. Because if you memorize it, and you memorize the names of the 7 conjugations, you can do any of the paradigms from that information. You don't need to memorize all the rest. When I was in seminary, we had to memorize all those paradigms in the back, page after page after page after page. We'd come in, we'd have a quiz. Write out the piel for a certain verb. Write out the pual for a certain verb. We'd have to memorize. We were never taught that there were clues to understanding how these were formed, and that all we really needed to know was the Cal paradigm. And so this is one of the reasons why we asked you to memorize the Cal paradigm. It's very important. If you memorize the Cal paradigm, you know the names of the 7 conjugations, you have all of the perfect verbs in your back pocket. You will identify all of them, no matter where you see them. All you have to do is pronounce them and you've got them. But you have to memorize this one paradigm, the Cal. Therefore, fair warning. There may be a pop quiz sometime next week that will require you to memorize or require you to give the forms of the Cal Perfect, all of them, to write them out from scratch. Okay? And I will pick any of the following verbs, and then our time is up. But I'm going to give you these verbs. It'll be any of them, and they all will be pointed the same. They all will everything will be the same. There'll be no distinction. I may use kathav, he wrote. I may use katal, he killed. I may use shamer, he kept. Or I may use malak, he reigned. Okay? Now, if you remember on malak, is when the kaf is not final, it's not a final form. That's all it is. It's still the kaf is still there, right here. All right, those are the 4. So practice doing these 4. Memorize it and practice writing them out. Write out all, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 forms. Use your book, page 91, the charts to be your pattern. Copy it, and you will have it.